how would you like to live for 1,000 years or even longer than that? Dr. Calvin Mercer is one of the few scholars considering the religious implications of radical life extension, a term that refers to science and technology that provides extreme and maybe even indefinite longevity of healthy human life. So without any further ado, I would like to bring on Dr. Mercer. Hello, Dr. Mercer. How are you?
Hello, Stephen. Thanks for having me on.
Very glad to have you here, sir. We have a wonderful roster of questions here. You're a specialist in transhumanism, and this is a very fascinating topic for me. Can we start out maybe by defining what transhumanism is?
Okay. Transhumanism is, I guess you could call it a movement. It's an intellectual, cultural movement, you could say, that has as its mission, its general mission, the radical enhancement of our mental, physical, psychological capabilities. One of those enhancements that gets a lot of attention is, of course, radical life extension, as you mentioned, or extreme longevity. And go ahead.
Oh, no, please, by all means, this is very, very interesting because the subject is so huge, and the extreme longevity is just one small area within it. Am I not right about that?
Yeah, that's right. Again, it's covering the range of mental, physical, psychological capabilities that we have to basically eliminate those traits or qualities that we consider undesirable and enhance those that we consider desirable, make us smarter, stronger, happier. It's a very science-based, technology-based movement, utilizing technologies like genetic engineering, tissue regeneration, merging of computer technology and human biology. Max Moore, who's a very creative transhumanist, gave a lecture a few years ago where he, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically he said, "Thank you, evolution, for getting us this far, but you have left us with a body that suffers, ages, falls apart. We appreciate you getting us this far, but we'll take it from here." And so with computer technology and genetic developments and information technology and all the various kinds of possibilities that we have now, we are looking at, if you will, taking control of evolution, putting our own hands on the mechanisms and directing it, rather than simply being passive recipients of evolution, if you could say it that way. And it's, we're going to see the emergence of techno sapiens, if you will. I mean, the one question is the species as we know it going to come to an end or simply be radically altered? I don't know. The future is really uncertain with regard to that, because there are a lot of different scenarios about how this could unfold. There are more moderate scenarios and more radical scenarios.
It's way too early to know for sure.
Well, let me just talk in more specifically about some of the scenarios. So let's just take the body, for example. A more moderate scenario would be maintaining our bodies. That is the basic structure of our physicality, while moving ahead with becoming smarter, stronger, happier, and living radically extended, healthy lives. A more radical scenario that is being discussed, not in science fiction books, but by very capable people who are associated with our leading universities, is, as the Hindus say, drop the body. And so here we're talking about transferring memory and personality which is, what some would say is who we are, essentially. I mean, as you can kind of imagine, this gets into enormous kinds of religious and philosophical questions about the nature of human beings. But there's very serious talk that of figuring out how to map the information in the brain and transferring that information that contains our memory and personality into some sort of digital context in order to release us once and for all from an imperfect, disease-prone body. And, of course, should our science and technology get to the point of actually being able to accomplish this kind of cybernetic immortality, it's going to have a tremendous impact on everything. And that's really, I'm not a scientist. I work on the social and religious implications of these developments. But you only have to just think really about either one of these scenarios. Just take the moderate scenario. If people start living, for 500 years in the framework of the basic physicality that we know ourselves to be, it's going to, the implications of that for the economy, for politics, family life, religion are just mind-boggling. And I think even if this were to happen, this kind of thing were to start happening, 100 years from now, we're nowhere near ready in terms of having the kind of conversation we need to have in our culture to be ready for this sort of thing.
Right. Well, transhumanism is a relatively new or young movement. Has it encountered any opposition from the religious circles or even from political or scientific or the medical field? What sort of opponents to transhumanism have cropped up?
Well, at this point, I'd say the political and medical, worlds have not opposed because it's not firmly yet on the radar of politicians, elected officials. It's not on I don't think, the general radar of the medical establishment. But this is going to change. I've said that I think that in time that conversations about human enhancement will trump global climate change and terrorism and everything else. I mean, I think this is one of the most significant developments in the history of the human species. And also, just to give an indicator of how this is changing, there's a man named Ray Kurzweil, who is probably the leading theoretician, the leading thinker, I guess, of transhumanism, and he has been hired as the director of engineering at Google. So here you have the leading visionary, the leading sort of thinker, I guess, of transhumanism, now connected to lots of money, right? So some of us have said for some time that once the wealthy class sniffs the possibilities of living indefinitely or making their children smarter, that the money pipelines are going to open widely. And I think that this is beginning to happen. And so how quickly things will develop is uncertain. I mean, we just don't know. Ray Kurzweil probably has one of the more ambitious timelines. He predicts that with the exponential increase in technologies that we're looking at, that we're going to approach what he calls a singularity, which is kind of a point where progress is so rapid that in so many different areas that it outstrips our ability to comprehend it and just radically transforms reality as we know it. And he predicts, I think his prediction of that, his latest prediction of that is 2045. And I know when I lecture about this, when I'm lecturing to people who are, I don't know, 50 and above, they get this sort of, odd look on their face, and you have to explain it, and they're not sure about it, whether it could happen or not, and they're not sure if they would like it. When I'm talking to anyone 25 years and below, they get it. They either already know about these things, or they get it very quickly, and it's not that bizarre to them that we could eliminate aging from the human species. And the demand is there. We operate in a supply-demand context. The demand for engineering our bodies and minds is already evident from the popularity of psychotropic drugs and sexual performance pharmaceuticals, cosmetic surgery, sports medicine, all this. So, these successful efforts that are already in place to impact our mood and our body are going to pale against the wave of engineering technologies that are on the horizon.
Well, the reason I broached the topic of the timeline, Dr. Mercer, is because, frankly, I don't want to live as an 80-year-old for 500 years. I'm kind of hoping that we can tonight perhaps motivate the movement to hurry it up a little bit while we still can enjoy life. But obviously, there's no way to pin that down. Well, let me ask you about your opinion.
Could I speak to that, though? It's the radical life enthusiasts are very, very clear that they have zero interest in prolonging a frail, weak, disease-prone life. I mean, they have no interest in that. And so the vision or the image is not of an 80 or 90-year-old living for 500 years, not an 80 or 90-year-old that we're familiar with, that image. But rather of a vigorous body that would, if you really begin to be able to engineer the body, then re-engineer the body, then you're talking about healthy extension of life. But of course, there's kind of an interesting dynamic here because some of the people who are very, very interested in working hard on this are folks in their 50s and 60s who see this coming, see death approaching, or see old age approaching. And I'll throw this in that there are a lot of younger technicians or computer scientists and folks who are interested in this. There are more and more PhD dissertations being written in these areas. And so a few years ago, I wasn't quite sure what the drive there was. And I think I've figured it out. For, a younger person who say is in their 20s or 30s, this is like discovering the West. It's like landing on the moon, right? It's the new frontier. It's just exciting, and so it's not necessarily like, say, someone in their 50s or 60s. It's not necessarily existential. That's just a personal kind of observation I've made.
Oh, well, I remember many moons ago when I studied under you as an undergraduate, you would never tell us what some of your spiritual beliefs were. However, I'm curious about, in regards to transhumanism and radical life extension in particular, and you don't have to answer this if you prefer not to, Dr. Mercer, but in your opinion, is it moral to want to live forever or even for a very long time?
Well, that's a good question. In itself, it seems to me, living forever is not immoral. I'm not sure why it would be immoral in itself. I think that morality issues come into play when living forever is viewed as coming at the expense of others, at depriving others of opportunities, at soaking up, research dollars that could be used to feed the poor. So I think that's where the morality comes in, and there are legitimate moral questions. But it seems to me you could turn this question around. if the technology is there, or we have a sense that it can be developed, is it moral to refuse people the choice that to have that option, to participate in that option? So you can turn the question around and look at it in a lot of different ways. But you're good to raise the ethical question, and ethicists are increasingly weighing in on these kinds of developments, because they see them as not just the stuff of science fiction like they were 40 or 50 years ago. They are now being the research is being done in government labs and university labs and companies all around the world. So the ethical questions are pressing, increasingly pressing, and some of the lines are being drawn. For example, some people will draw a distinction between therapy and enhancement. And they'll say, okay, therapy is ethical, enhancement is not. So therapy would be repairing or addressing breakdowns in the current body or whatever. So
Right.
trying to cure cancer would be a therapy, whereas enhancement, trying to design your body so that you can run 10 times faster, that would be an enhancement. So some people draw the line there. That therapy is fine and enhancement is not. Other people will draw the line. We'll talk about enhancing yourself is acceptable, but messing around with the gene pool so that you alter future generations, that's a line we shouldn't cross. So, these kinds of questions are being increasingly, and I think appropriately, debated.
Right, because the potential for hacks are definitely there. Wouldn't you say, Dr. Mercer? We can the potential to do literally amazing things with our bodies exists within the transhumanist movement. And so I think as the interview goes on, we can address some of the specific, moral sensitive areas. For example, the ecological consequences of all of us living together, living longer, producing more wastes of all sorts. Could our planet sustain an already hyper extended population for indefinitely with the resources we have, or would this compel us to broaden our horizons and colonize other planets even?
Well, that's a good question, and one thing to keep in mind is that the developments in human enhancement. Let's just take the enhancement of extreme longevity. That particular enhancement, when and as it comes, is not going to be occurring in a vacuum. The same kind of computer developments and technology developments that's making that particular enhancement possible are also going to be addressing other aspects of society. So it's hard to figure out how that is all going to relate. So, for example, if you've got more people and you're worried, for example, about crime, well, what if we figure out the genetic, the antisocial gene, and we figure out how to switch that off, or we give a pill that calms folks down. We're already doing that, right? But what if we get much, much better at that? So there may be a lot more people, but we may be much better able to live with each other in society. 70% of the people in prison are there because of mental illness or addiction, or that number's close, I think. And so, if we address those kinds of issues with enhancements, then having a lot more people, may not be that much of a problem. And also, I think it's going to be very important. There are people really pushing for this, that our governments and our societal institutions have to weigh in and have to play an important role here. So if, for example, you had people starting to live for hundreds of years, and that you worry about overcrowding, Well, I'm simplifying, of course. It's never this simple, but if you had, say, a law that if you partake of this particular enhancement, you cannot have children, you can't reproduce, right? Or if you decide to not partake of this enhancement, then you can reproduce. So that would, in a very simplified way of thinking about it, that would solve the population problem right there. So there's a lot of different aspects to this, not only other technological developments that might occur that might address some of the problems that will come with radical extreme longevity, but also how well our institutions and our government institutions are going to address it. How well is our educational institutions going to prepare people to live in this kind of world? Those are some thoughts about that.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, then it's reasonable to say, hey, if we've got the moxie to extend our lifespan by 500 years, then we're going to have what it takes to offset any environmental degradations. We're also going to have what it takes to eradicate poverty. We're going to have what it takes to balance the social illnesses and things of that sort. Am I understanding that correctly, Dr. Mercer?
Well, of course, and to come back to that is, look, we've not done that. We've not done that up to this point. There are people starving in the world. There are people, we don't have health care that's spread around the world. We don't have education, equal education opportunities. So, the comeback is we're not doing that already. So why do you expect us to be able to do that with this developing technology? And the comeback to that is, look, new technology always brings with it challenges, and we have to deal with those. But here's another kind of way of thinking about it too: is I tend to agree with this point of view that I'm about to express. Is that there are some of us that do not think that we're going to have the choice of whether to unfold these technologies or not. That they're going to happen.
Right.
The argument would be that if they don't occur, in open society, under the attention of under the media attention of an open society and under government regulations, then they're going to occur offline. They're going to occur in rogue countries, or they're going to occur in labs. I mean, some of this stuff it's like any technology. It's going to be expensive and complicated at first, then it's going to get simpler, and more people are going to have access to it. So that's the argument that some are making, that that our elected officials and politicians need to get much better educated at this, and that we need to have this kind of conversation in our society, because we're not going to be able to stop it. And we need to be able to have it develop in a context where it can, do good rather than harm.
Absolutely. I see where you're coming from, because frankly, some of the repercussions are scary. This day and age, we have to worry about, for example, an Aurora theater shooting or some sort of mass tragedy. Imagine if the assailant or the offender were like an X-Man or something of that nature. So these ethical questions, I do think, are important to ponder now, so that we can shape this very, very young movement. But I'll tell you what, Dr. Mercer, I can't help but be curious about what a radically extended life, extreme longevity, what effect that might have on the Hindu concepts of reincarnation, for example. Would this if reincarnation can be thought of as a natural process, almost like a plant's tropism toward the light, toward the sunlight, or something like that, would extreme human longevity impact those natural cycles of reincarnation somehow? Or could you postulate maybe what Hinduism's or Buddhism's reaction to the idea of a radically extended life might be?
Well, unfortunately, I think most of the conversation about these developments from the religion side have been in the context of Christianity and Judaism. one of my interests is having thoughtful people from all the different religions begin to weigh in more and more, and that really was the genesis of my 2009 co-edited book, where we recruited scholars from the different religions to talk about this, and then the book coming out this fall is a sequel to that. And so it's hard to say how some of these religions are going to respond to this, but the response is going to have to be not only in terms of theology, but in terms of institutions and in terms of practices, religious practice. But you mentioned the reincarnation. So I'm just kind of winging it here because I'm not a Hindu scholar, but reincarnation is connected to karma. And if people start living for hundreds of years or radically long lives, then the karmic influences, it seems to me, may will impact one in that long life rather than show up in future lives. So the concept of reincarnation, I could see that being weakened or getting less importance. But the idea of karma would still be there. So I don't know. I'm just speculating on that. In terms of the so-called Western religions, the common complaint, I guess you would say, of transhumanists is that they're playing God and promising immortality. And the transhumanists, I've noticed, have gotten more savvy over the most transhumanists are atheist or agnostic in their orientations. Now, not all, but I would say a majority, and so they really didn't pay that much attention, or I think really understand religion. But I think some of them are beginning to realize that, for better or worse, religion plays a very important role in our culture, and they need to understand it if they're going to make their case in the marketplace. And so they've become more savvy. They don't talk about immortality so much anymore. They talk about indefinite, because then you can still be hit by a bus or burned up in a supernova. And so they say, look, we're not promising immortality. All we're doing, and you can hear the language in the spin here, all we're doing is doing the same thing that traditional medicine does. We're just doing it in a more radical way, right? Traditional medicine has extended your lifespan, and that's what its job is to have you live longer, healthy. That's all we're doing. We're just figuring out ways to do it in an extreme fashion. So you can see, how this can be pitched in different ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And frankly, I think the entire movement itself again, I can't emphasize enough, the radical life extension is just one subcategory of the transhumanist movement. And what fascinates me is how this young movement is going to interact with the established Orthodox religions, both the East and the West, because I tell you something, Dr. Mercer, one thing that strikes me is that the Western concepts of heaven and paradise seem to be quite carnal, in the sense that, there are rivers of milk and honey and streets paved with gold and, 40 virgins, etc., very opulent and sensual paradises. Whereas the Eastern ideas of heaven, you have your nirvana, which, I'm sorry, but that doesn't really sound too appealing. You just sort of wink out and become nothing. So two vastly different ideas of what immortality is like. And my question is, I'm curious to see how this difference in concepts of paradise might translate into Asian versus Western implementation of life extension technology or other types of transhuman body modifications, for example, and things of that sort. This notion, this idea that heaven or immortality is different for each larger class of human beings is one that I find quite interesting.
Well, again, that conversation, unfortunately, is at the beginning stages with these religions. So I'm only speculating here. The West it seems to me that in the sort of traditional or conservative religions of the West, that the afterlife is something better, something, as you described it, something very much better. Whereas in the East, it is, well, I guess ultimately you're looking for, something much, much better, but it's coming back in another life. So I don't know. I do get a sense that the Eastern religions are less sort of reactive or concerned or upset by some of these developments. But again, it's very early in that conversation to I think draw a lot of conclusions about East and West and how they're going to respond to this.
Yes, and to me, that's what's so exciting about it, the fact that it's so early. You mentioned before the notion of the singularity, this idea that technology is going to build upon itself until finally it understands, it sort of becomes almost sentient, as it were, and sort of improves itself. It sort of wakes up. It has a Hal moment from that Stanley Kubrick film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. It becomes aware of itself. The singularity obviously is a very important event and seems inextricably linked to the process of extending our lifespan. Dr. Mercer, could you perhaps describe the singularity in a little bit more detail for us, because it's a complicated concept?
Yeah. Let me make one more point about your last question about the East and West religions. I do think that one of the things that at this point, all the religions that are where folks are weighing in on this are saying is that the religions want to make sure that we don't just have quantity of life and extend the length of life, that we want quality. And so I think all the religions are saying that, look, we'll weigh in later on the extreme longevity, but let's not miss that it's very important to have a quality of life. And I do think that's one of the ways that religion can weigh in valuably, or the best of religion. Religion, of course, has a lot of different dimensions to it. With regard to singularity, I suppose he didn't invent the word, but Ray Kurzweil, that's usually associated with him now, I think, certainly popularized it. His vision is related to the development of artificial intelligence, and so the idea is that technology is becoming more and more integrated into our bodies. I mean, if you just look at telephones, they used to be, out on a hook, and now they're cell phones 2 inches from your ear, and then they'll be, embedded. So technology is becoming increasingly embedded in and merging with human physiology. The pacemaker is just will one day be viewed as a very primitive kind of version of this. And so Kurzweil's vision, if I understand it, is that computerized reality, or whatever, or intelligence, I guess, is going to not only become thoroughly embedded in the human being, but in matter itself. And that his long-term vision is indeed that intelligence sort of becomes embedded in the universe, and the universe wakes up, so to speak. That's kind of a visionary, long-term idea, but it is in one sense sort of a spiritual kind of notion, as he describes it.
Wow, Dr. Mercer, that's a lot for us to wrap our minds around. We're going to explore this topic in more detail in a bit, but we're going to break now for a 1-minute commercial. And when we return, we will talk with Dr. Calvin Mercer. Incidentally, you can find him at ecu.edu/religion program/Mercer. We'll be right back in 1 minute.
A new era in psychic services has begun. psychicaccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at psychicaccess.com.
Welcome back to the Psychic Viewpoint. I'm here with the head of the religion program at East Carolina University, Dr. Calvin Mercer. The topic tonight is going beyond human limitations with transhumanism and the transhumanist movement. Dr. Mercer, before we broke for the break there, we were talking about the singularity, and you mentioned a fascinating comparison or an analogy illustrating this concept as sort of tying technological advancement with the arising of consciousness in the entire universe. So you refer to it as the universe waking up. And would you mind expanding on that topic a little bit, please, because it's such a fascinating idea.
Well, again, this is, I think, I want to direct people to the work of Ray Kurzweil, who this is really his vision. It's not only his vision. And that is, when you talk about that sort of thing, it sounds like it's far out into the future, and I do think that's relatively far out. I mean, there are more immediate things that are unfolding, but it's kind of interesting that a science and technology based movement that is largely non-religious or atheist can, I think, have an ultimate vision that you could interpret as spiritual. Now, there are religious scholars who have analyzed transhumanism and have tried to understand it in terms of a religion, that it does have an eschatology and it does have an understanding of human beings and so on. So it's an interesting movement, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, I think the assumption is once we're able to affect an extended lifespan, then it's automatically a good thing. But what I worry about is the potential for prejudice and racism to be applied. For example, in the Middle East, where you have in Iraq, for example, different minorities of Sunni versus Shiite versus Kurdish residents, and even here in America, at various stages in its history, America's had problems with African Americans, Mexicans, or what if they decide one day in the future that it's the Jews' turn again? I see that with what I fear is that with transhumanism and extended lifespans, that there might be the threat or the possibility of sort of shunting a pariah group into extinction against their will. It's an alternate tool for. Could it be an alternate tool for genocide, or is that being too reactionary, too panicky, and too paranoiac in your opinion?
No, I think that is a really great question. Is the social implications of all this? Let me give you a version of that. There are people who are really worried about that what we're going to develop is another divide in humanity from those who are the genetically enriched, if you could say, the gen rich, and the quote unquote normals. So the genetically enriched would be those who can either afford the new technologies or and choose them, and they would begin to become radically enhanced, and then the quote unquote normals, either because they could not afford the technology or because they choose not to use it, and so we get yet another divide to add to racial and gender and rich poor. And again, to come back, to that is that technology, progress and technology always creates challenges, and we just have to meet them. It's not a reason to shut it down, but it is a concern, and it's a concern that those on the moderate liberal side of the religion of religion, and those who are weighing in, are very, very concerned about. And for example, Christian ethicists and theologians who are working on this, Christianity in one of its versions has always been a champion of the disenfranchised. And so while liberals in general tend to be open to science and technology, they are very concerned about these potential social kinds of issues. And I think that, and again, most of the conversation has been in Judaism and Christianity, so I'll talk, some of what I'm saying will relate to those religions. But I do think that the kind of usual conservative liberal divide is going to get all mixed up here. The transhumanism is going to shake up that divide, and it's going to get messy as rival factions, each consisting of unusual alliances, contend with one another. Because while liberals are open to science and technology and working as co-creators with God to make the world a better place, they are concerned about these social injustices. And I think conservatives or fundamentalists are going to be divided. They have a natural negative reaction to anything that's science-based. But on the other hand, I think that there are going to be conservatives who support this because they are just lured by the promise of immortality, by virtue of the survival instinct that every human being has. So it's going to get really messy in the religious world, I think, in terms of how religions respond to this.
Sure. Can you imagine, let's say you're a Roman Catholic and, you go to your priest and you're like, Father, please, I cannot stay married to this war hag for the next 700 years. Grant me a divorce. Do you see? I mean, what would living that long have to do to a marriage contract? Might society modify its marriage practices by agreeing to shorter periods of marriage, 5-year trial periods, for example, so I can see a situation where we might even have to change the marriage legal code, and man, the Pope is really going to have to make some hard and fast decisions once this technology starts gaining traction, because I think that's why it's so fascinating about it, Dr. Mercer, is that we're talking about the intersection point of technology and spirituality, of Microsoft and the Bhagavad Gita, as it were. And so that's really what I'm curious about, too. What is this going to do to human relationships and family dynamics?
Yeah, well, it's going to change that, and just like it's going to change everything. And I want to make one more point about the concern that so many people have about that these technologies are going to be in the domain of the wealthy, privileged class. And I want to use this comment to throw out one more name. I've thrown out Ray Kurzweil. This would be your listeners who may not be familiar with these conversations. Another name would be Aubrey de Grey, Degrey. You definitely want to check out Aubrey de Grey. He is passionate about terminating aging in the human species, and he's got a vast program and research teams working on this, Aubrey de Grey. But I've heard him say, as a rebuttal to the concern about social injustice, I've heard him say that extreme longevity is not going to come overnight. It's not like they're going to invent this pill and then it'll be there. It's going to come in stages, and one of the first stages, he thinks, is going to be something like they're going to quadruple the lifespan of a mouse. And because of the transferability of research between a mouse and a human being, that's going to hit the front pages of the newspaper. And Aubrey tells me that that's when it's going to dawn on the general public that, hey, this could happen. He says that once that happens, depending on how much money is involved in the research, it's going to be at least 10 years before you begin to transfer that technology to human beings. And he says in those 10 years, between the time that it dawns on the general public that, immortality is around the corner, and the 10 years when it starts to become available, he says the pressure from the masses on the governments and on the institutions that have access to this technology are going to be so potent that there's no way that you can keep this technology from the masses. Now, again, to come back to that is, well, we don't do this with education and food and so on, but I'm just saying that that's the kind of conversation we need to be having, I think, as we think about these kinds of developments and getting ready for them.
Right. I would imagine that, playing the devil advocate here, that the urge for the continuity of survival sort of trumps the urge, the philanthropy of, feeding the entire world. I mean, sure, food is primary, but wow, everybody wants to live forever. And I'm just scared to death that it'll be commercialized to the point where certain groups will be excluded from it and other groups won't. That's my big concern right there. And I'm also concerned about how it's going to affect courtship behavior and courtship rituals, and even if people might even abandon the idea of getting married, period, if they can live forever, and engage in some people would probably choose to engage in a life of hedonism, whereas others might still decide to settle down for centuries together. But it's still very fascinating to me what the effect will be on human population, reproduction, and relationship as well. And of course, I realize that with a lot of this, we're firmly in the arena of speculation and guessing. There's no way to be positive about some of these things. But what's your intuition on the dimension of human relationship and romance, sexuality, reproduction, birth rates even? Bearing in mind we're in the middle of a population crisis on the earth, some would argue. So what's your thinking on these matters, Dr. Mercer?
Well, let me, before I answer that, because I don't know how to answer it, let me make a note. Let me put a plug here. I've just been named co-editor with a scholar from the UK by Palgrave Macmillan for a new series, book series, and it's not just about religion. The series is Palgrave Studies in the Future of Humanity and Its Successors. And the reason I mention that is that in this series, what we're wanting to do is recruit a sociologist who works in the area of family therapy and family relations. So we want an economist, we want politicians, right? So the series is going to try to get those kinds of conversations started in a serious way, so that it's not a matter of just kind of speculation, but trying to get serious scholars in these different areas. So we desperately need someone who's an expert in marriage and family to think through these kinds of things. I'm not sure, what to say about that, other than, people start living for hundreds of years. I think that it's going to make for a lot more variety in, our human life. We're going to be moving through various careers. We're going to be probably moving through various family settings. That's what I would just say off the top of my head. But, you can, as you begin to think about this, you can see the impact this is going to have on every single area of the human experience. Sure. If it stays human. And again, that is an open question of the human species may be on its way out. We may be into a different kind of existence. There's a new book coming out. I'm going to throw out one more name because I know you've got a lot of readers in your audience, people who keep up with things. The other name I'll throw out is Nick Bostrom, Bostrom, Nick Bostrom. He's Oxford University, and he's the head of the Future of Humanity Institute there. I think that's what you call it. He's got a new book that's just has been released in the UK, and it's not released here in the States yet, called Super Intelligence. I can't wait to get my hand on it because this may be one of the most radical developments in all this stuff we've been talking about. And I know I'm trailing off a bit from what you asked, but I wanted to get this in about the development of artificial intelligence. There's long been a debate about whether we can make a computer that is smarter than the human brain, and I think it's kind of generally agreed now by computer scientists that we're going to get there. And so you just want to start thinking, okay, so if you have a computer that's 3 times more intelligent power than the human brain, the average human brain, what is that going to mean? And there are people thinking very seriously about all of this. And if you take a super intelligent machine, more intelligent than human beings, and then you hook it to robotics, right? Robotics is another part of all this that's really developing. The Japanese are really good at this, and we're doing it here in this country. So you take super intelligence and you connect it then to arms and legs or robotics. What are you going to get, right? Some people are really worrying about this. So let's say, the computer is fundamentally programmed to make paper clips. Well, it's then going to go out and maybe use nanotechnology to turn everything around it into paper clips. I mean, I'm simplifying this, right? But there are very serious people who are saying we need to work very hard in these artificial intelligence programs that are developing to plug in what's called friendly AI, friendly artificial intelligence, so that we don't create these super intelligent machines that then do us in, that they, have some respect for the human creator. So super intelligence has been called the last human invention.
Right.
And again, I think this book that Bostrom is going to really help us see exactly where we are on this front. It's a very, very important front in all of this discussion.
Well, Dr. Mercer, I really do appreciate you joining us tonight. We've come to the end of our time together, and I tell you, I could take another 2 or 3 hours of this. I'm in hog heaven over here. I just want to remind everyone that if you'd like to help Dr. Mercer open up a dialogue on this important subject, visit him at ecu.edu religion program. I'm sorry, let me try that again. ecu.edu/religion program/Mercer, and pick up the book that he co-edited, The Religion and the Implications of Radical Life Extension. Dr. Mercer, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Stephen, very much.
Hello, my name is Rez Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.